I'm very happy to be here. It's my first visit to Belgrade. And I really stretched myself to be able to join you at this very critical moment in Serbia's decisions about the future of its food and agriculture and freedom. I'm a quantum physicist by training. And there are two reasons why I've spent so much of my time and so much of my life working on GMOs. The first is related to the fact that quantum theory tells you, like John Fagan was telling us, that when you pull a part out, there is interconnectedness. My thesis was on non-separability in quantum theory. The mechanical philosophy assumes everything is separate. But that was a very artificial construction of the world. Even in physics, we know everything is connected. In biology, we should know even better that everything is connected, and any scientific paradigm that works on a mechanical worldview is 100 years too old. It's primitive. And I watched how a mechanical paradigm of chemical farming had destroyed my country. For the United Nations, I did a book on the Green Revolution and was forced to title it The Violence of the Green Revolution. Einstein had said that it's extremely easy for a lazy mind to create bigness and violence, but it takes sophistication to work in the small and work through non-violence. Agroecology is the kind of system that recognizes the relationships in nature. So having done this book on the Green Revolution, I started to get invited to agriculture meetings. And I went because I wanted to learn more. One of these meetings was in 1987, where what became the biotech industry was present. They were shaping themselves into the biotech industry. There was no genetically engineered crop in the world at that time. The old agrochemical industry was now planning to take hold of agriculture through the seed. And the argument they made was this: you have to do genetic engineering in order to claim a patent. Because when you go to a farmer and say your seed is mine, of course every farmer will say forget it. We've had it for millennia, ancestors bred it, nature gave it. So adding this one new gene in the very crude technology that was shown by John Fagan became the way to get the patent. The technology was just the excuse. The objective was owning seeds through patenting in order to collect rents from the renewal of life. It is in effect a seed tax, a seed royalty. And a company like Monsanto in the US, companies like Syngenta in Europe, wasn't a big enough market for them. So they wanted a global market. And that is why they drew into the World Trade Organization an intellectual property treaty, particularly Article 27.3b of the WTO agreement on trade-related intellectual property rights, called TRIPS. It's called trade-related because it wasn't trade-related. India, our ambassador to GATT, said, patenting is a national sovereign process. We will decide what will be patented and what will not be patented. And in India's law of 1972, which was recognized as a model law across the world, agriculture could not be patented, and in medicine, you could only have what is called a process patent, not a product patent. You couldn't own the medicine, only the method of making it, so that cheaper ways of making generic drugs were available, and that is why India is the supplier of low-cost generic medicine to the world. There have been cases on this. Novartis, which is a subunit of Syngenta, the second biggest company in that map. Sandoz and Ciba joined to make Novartis, and then they joined with Astra and Zeneca to become Syngenta. Novartis sued the government of India, saying change your laws that only give patents for something authentically innovative. Because we have an Article 3D in our law. After we were taken to WTO, after we were sued through TRIPS, we still ensured that innovation was authentic innovation. I must speak slowly. Okay. I'm sorry. Sure, I'm sorry. So Article 3D does not allow evergreening of patents. Novartis wanted to destroy our domestic cancer drug industry, which can provide a drug for 10,000 rupees for a month of treatment, and they wanted to sell the same medicine for 175,000 rupees for a month of treatment. The Supreme Court rejected and dismissed their plea. The patent officers had done it before. So, I do this work on seed saving and promotion of organic agriculture and keeping myself awake and the world awake on what comes with GMOs. I started the movement, Navdanya, on my flight back from Geneva after that meeting of '87. I said, if they want to patent seeds and they want to genetically modified seed, then our duty is to protect the integrity and freedom of seed. And I didn't know where to take us. All I knew, I had to do it. I didn't know how to do it. I taught myself how to do it. Went village to village collecting seeds. And it was the women, peasant women, who were my teachers. We've set up 110 community seed banks to defend seed as a commons and not as a privatized property of Monsanto. We have worked with our government and our parliament to ensure our laws do not go the Monsanto way. So Monsanto went on record in 1995 saying they wrote the WTO agreement on intellectual property. They said we were the patient, diagnostician, and physician all in one. Now, in all democracies, you have independence of powers. You have a separate judiciary that's independent of the executive. You have a parliament that keeps oversight on the executive. That is how societies can function. And all of them in an authentic democracy should be accountable to the public. In a democracy, it used to be said it's of the people, by the people, for the people. And Monsanto is not just genetically engineering organisms, it is genetically engineering democracy to become of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations. And it is, GMOs have become a symbol of a toxic dictatorship. Toxic both in the fact that the two products they brought, the BT crops and the Roundup Ready crops, are toxic in and of themselves. They've only managed to move toxic genes into plants because it's a crude technology and can only do the single gene expression, as was pointed out. They can't deal with the complexity of multi-genetic traits. But it's also, by its necessity, a dictatorship. Imposing an intellectual property rights regime on the world was already a dictatorship. Monsanto says in that 1995 speech, we achieved something unprecedented. We defined a problem, and for them the problem they defined was farmers save seeds. Offered a solution, now it should be treated as an intellectual property crime to save seeds. That's what got me committed to not just reject this notion that saving seeds is an intellectual property crime, but to recognize that saving seeds is our highest ecological and ethical duty on this planet. And no law can come in the way of that higher duty. And our entire movement of Navdanya, which both means 9 seeds, and it also means the new gift, is based on rejecting the notion that Monsanto invented the seed. Seed is not invented. It has come from millions of years of nature's evolution. Thousands of years of farmers breeding. Putting one toxic gene doesn't create the million years evolution. It definitely doesn't create the 1,000-year breeding. Most patents are based on biopiracy. I had to fight a case against Monsanto in the European Patent Office. Wheat, as you know, has been so bred into having high levels of gluten expression that a lot of Westerners are now allergic to gluten. Indian wheats have been bred for taste and quality, and some of the ancient varieties, which are also delicious, have very low gluten, and in fact they have a gluten silencing gene. So Monsanto patents our old wheat varieties for a gluten-free product market. And these patents are fascinating because they don't just patent one thing. By moving one toxic gene or just doing a conventional breeding, as in the case of wheat, they claim everything. In the case of wheat, they own the wheat, the seeds of the wheat, the flour, and every product that could be made from the flour. Every product. So we opposed it. I also filed cases in the European Patent Office, but in the Indian Supreme Court. And when the judges asked me, so are you saying, Dr. Shiva, that companies like Monsanto want to control our food through seed? I said, yes. In Christian religion, there's a prayer, and I went to a Catholic school, so I know it. Give us this day our daily bread. I said, that's going to become a prayer to Monsanto if you don't watch out. And we joke a lot and say GMO could in effect mean God move over. We are taking over. We are now going to claim ourselves to be the creators and the collectors of rent from life. I'm very proud of our patent office in India. They just rejected a very broad patent claim by Monsanto on climate-ready crops. Every crop under the sun for every environmental and climate stress under the sun. So the patent office said, well, you're claiming you've done something new. The genes you're using are known. So Article 3D of our law says, not known novelty. And you're owning a biological process which you haven't created. You're moving a gene does not create the biological process of the reproduction of the plant. Article 3J of the Indian Patent Law. In my view, the most important judgment on patenting anywhere in the world. Not a single newspaper covered it. I wrote an article on it, but no media coverage. Because if you look at what the GMO industry says, they repeat three things. We improve yields, we are the solution to hunger, and therefore anyone coming in the way is creating hunger. We reduce chemical use, so we work for the environment and we are sustainable, and we bring prosperity to farmers. John's presentation addressed responses to those in detail. Have you ever heard the biotech industry or Monsanto say, and we want to own patents on seed? Why do they hide the intellectual property piece? It's the central piece in this whole thing. Owning seed and patenting seed and having intellectual property rights is the central piece, an issue on which they never say a word, and anyone who writes about them doesn't say a word. It's the big silence, and that's the silence we have to break. The day we can start restricting patents, Monsanto's dead, GMOs are dead. Because if they can't collect royalties and rents, they're not interested. They're not interested in a technology. They're interested in a myth of a technology which brings them this ownership right. Now this ownership right, as I mentioned, Monsanto drafted the laws of the WTO. And that's the day we started fighting this. India created all kinds of safeguards in our law, and I was on the drafting committee for a related law on plant genetic resources, which became Plant Genetic Resources and Farmers' Rights Act. And in it is a clause that the farmer's right to save, exchange, improve, breed, sell seed can never be alienated. It's the only law in the world with a farmer's rights legally enshrined. course, Monsanto wasn't happy with that at all. So they tried to sneak in a 2004 seed law to undo the farmers' rights and also undo our biosafety laws by giving fast-track approval to GM seeds pending testing. We have a strong biosafety law. There's an attempt to deregulate it, just like there's an attempt in your country to deregulate it. And if you were to make a map of the world, there's a law, there's an attempt to deregulate it. Well, when the 2004 law was proposed, a law on compulsory registration, that the smallest of farmers would have to go to a central authority to seek approval for what they plant. It would mean spending money to register. It would mean spending time with the bureaucracy, and we know what bureaucracies are like. But worst, it would mean having the rejection of what your ancestors have evolved safely for millennia as not being good enough on criteria that don't reflect nature's evolution of farmers' breeding, the criteria of quality, diversity, and resilience. So I took this law and traveled the length and the breadth of the country. We did what we do in India, and I think Europe needs it now, and Serbia needs it now. Gandhi's legacy of Satyagraha, the fight for truth, the struggle for truth. Gandhi first practiced it in 1906 in South Africa, when the regime was forcing people to register. It was a compulsory registration of human beings on the basis of race. And Gandhi said, we will not be divided by race, we will not be identified by race, we are one common citizenry. And he led the Indian community to this amazing satyagraha. He then, when he moved back to India, he brought it to indigo. We were being forced to cultivate indigo, not food. He led the Champaran Satyagraha. 1930, the British said, wow, we can make so much money taxing salt and preventing Indians from making their own salt by making salt a monopoly. It was called the Salt Law. Gandhi walked to the Dandi beach, picked up the salt, said, nature gives it for free. We need it for our survival. We will continue to make salt. We will not obey your law. It's called the Salt Satyagraha. We are inspired by that, and we do the Seed Satyagraha. And I did this in 2005, after the 2004 law came. Traveled the length and breadth of the country, took 100,000 signatures to our Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and said, we are in the land of Gandhi. And you can pass this law, but we won't obey it. So you might as well not pass it. Meantime, the Parliament, of course, woke to it, and like your Parliament is now awake to the issue and is putting, I'm so happy to hear the chair of the Environmental Committee of the Parliament talking about her draft input into whatever amendments in law have to be made. That law of 2004 has never been passed, because just as she was saying, there are liability clauses in it, farmers' rights are enshrined, farmers' rights to save seed are totally protected. So of course it's not useful for Monsanto anymore. But a similar law is being attempted by the European Commission now, at this point. On May the 6th, the European Commission drafted a law. And the tragedy of Europe is a bunch of lobbyists become Europe. Lobbyists move into the Commission and do what they want to, and they become Europe. They're the ones who are bullying you, because it's a very false bullying. How can it be that Europe can say to access to the European Union, you must allow GMOs, when 8 countries and 50 regional governments have laws to be GMO free and have bans and moratoria? If that is what is within the European Union, how can those accessing to the European Union be forced to do something beyond what the current regions and governments are doing? And I think we need a campaign on this, and I have some ideas about how this could be done. It's a compulsory registration law. Can you imagine? A Serbian peasant will have to go to Brussels to seek permission of what they can plant in their garden. It's a law based on uniformity. Only uniform seeds will be approved through this compulsory registration. And we've done a law of the seed with the top breeders, biologists, lawyers. What does a real law of the seed look like? How does seed evolve? What is good breeding? What is good breeding in times of climate change? What is good breeding in terms of quality and taste of food? Breeding has given us tasteless nutritiousness mass. The only quality of food is what it weighs. And then when it's put onto a container and sent off. It's not a food system. We are not breeding seed for food. We are not growing food and agriculture for food. Look at the figures. 72% of the food eaten today grows on small farms. That is food and agriculture data from the UN, FAO data from the United Nations. 2013. 2013. This is in spite of all the machinery of the world trying to push industrial agriculture and GMOs. Industrial agriculture is only 28% of the food. Of the 4 GMOs, 1 is cotton. The 3 that are edible, canola is as good as failed because of the levels of contamination in Canada. So you really have corn and soya. You know how much of the corn and soya, which is the main crops accounted for by GMOs, how much of it is eaten directly by humans? Less than 10%. And that too because the poor Americans don't have labeling. The day they get labeling, it'll drop to 0. Because they'll stop eating stuff which has GMO ingredients. So even that 10% market exists, only because absence of labeling. The rest goes to biofuels. The rest goes to animal feed. It is not food. So even if they expand the acreage, they're not going to increase food supply. They're going to decrease it. The figures of Argentina are so clear. But we have had an experience with Bt cotton, the only crop that's genetically engineered and grown in India. Monsanto came into India it came in 95, started to do what it does, lock Indian companies into joint ventures and licensing arrangements. So very rapidly, they became dependent on selling Monsanto seeds. 97, 98, they started trials, open field trials. Put a big ad in the newspaper how the Indian farmers would get Bolgard, which is the trade name of Monsanto, for the Bt cotton. And I just looked at that ad and I said, let me check. Did they check with our Environment Ministry, which has a genetic engineering approval committee, which must do mandatory testing? Environment Ministry had never heard of Monsanto or Bt cotton. I called up the seed sector for the Agriculture Ministry. For every seed released in India, the law said that seeds must be tested in 22 agroclimatic zones for 2 years. Only then seed is released. Monsanto hadn't got there for approval either. So I sued. I took them to the Supreme Court. And in the process, we got mountains of data. In March of that year, Monsanto said some of the cotton of Gujarat was Bt. The breeder said, I did not steal from Monsanto, I have not done genetic engineering, I've done conventional breeding, and if there's Bt traces, it's come through contamination. That was March. April 2nd, mysteriously, the GMO Bt is approved. What was safe in unsafe in March became safe overnight. Not only did we fight that case, we've been monitoring since then. The first suicide started in a cotton area, 97, 98, I think, 97 winter. And we went down and rushed to study the suicide. It was a poor farmer who had bought the seed on credit. And as you watch, very, very rapidly, 95% of the cotton seed supply in India became BT cotton. 3 mechanisms by which alternatives were destroyed. Farmers are told your seeds are primitive, replace them. We'll even give you money, destroy it. Monsanto holds bonfires of farmer seeds. Somehow the public sector stops doing its work. We have the most eminent cotton research institute, and since Monsanto came, not one variety has been released by them, though they used to release about 20 every year. The scientists are still there, their brains are still there, the cotton is still there, and no variety comes out. Because there's always the same processes that allow these approvals through corruption also stop the public sector from doing its public work. And the third is the appropriation of the domestic seed industry, an issue John Fagan pointed out. 60 Indian seed companies are locked into licensing arrangements with Monsanto and are not allowed to sell anything but BT cotton. They have brilliant records of cotton breeding. They're the ones who were doing the hybrids before. The cotton seed used to cost 5 rupees a kilo, traditional cotton. Monsanto's cotton costs about 4,000 rupees a kilo. That's an 8,000% jump. It's supposed to control pests, but you've already been told it doesn't. In fact, the bollworm has become resistant, and they've already brought Bollguard 2, which is more expensive. And meantime, pests that were never pests of cotton have started to attack the cotton. Aphids and jacids and mealybugs and army bugs, and every year there's a whole new bug which needs more pesticides. 1,300% increase in pesticide use in the BT cotton areas. And it's not just India. In the BT cotton areas of China too, there's a 12-fold increase, 1,200% increase in pesticide use because of non-target pests growing. Now, in any technology, a technology is a tool. A tool is assessed, does it deliver? If it fails to deliver, you replace the tool. But for some reason, GMOs, while they're promised as a technology, are then treated as a new god. You can't question, you can't assess, you can't test, you can't evaluate. The argument of more yields, the failure to yield study of the US is there, but look at the Indian data. If you look at the data of India, cotton yields were hitting up to 1,000 or 1,200 kilogram a hectare. After BT cotton, they've dropped to 500. And yet the propaganda is yields have increased. Pesticide use decreased? No, it's increased. Farmers' prosperity? How does a patented seed of 8,000% more price get sold to a poor peasant who has no money? Through credit. What is the credit given for and against? What's mortgaged? The land. And every time the farmer goes, you just increase the land you're mortgaging. This is what has happened, what has triggered the epidemic of farmer suicides. The National Bureau of Crime Records of India, which is the official body that keeps track of suicides and homicides. For farmer suicides, the latest figure from 1995, when Monsanto started to enter and grab the market, to now is 284,000. There's a 600-something figure, which I can't remember, but nearly 300,000 farmers have committed suicide. And in some regions like Vidarbha, the suicides have jumped from 52 in 2001 before the BT cotton. And you can, if you make the map of the suicides and the map of BT cotton and the graph, it's identical. And they hit about 3,500 when it becomes 95%. Every half hour, a farmer is ending his life. And because we've done reports called Seeds of Suicide, every year we update these reports. Every time I go to Vidarbha, there's a suicide somewhere. You go to the home and you talk to the widow and you ask what the debt was for. She said, I had no idea he was buying these seeds because a GM seed looks like a non-GM seed. It's cotton seed. And I had no idea he was bringing this home on debt. Because as long as seed was in women's hands, women knew the seed. And seed never failed, you didn't have a price to pay, you never got into debt. And then Monsanto comes in and the men go to the market in the little town, have a little drink, and while you're a little tipsy, the sales agents come and say, we've got a miracle seed for you, you're going to be a millionaire. Just sign on your papers, give you the seed. And it's the day these agents of the seed and chemical companies come to tell the farmer your land is now ours. That's the day the farmer will go quietly into his field, drink a bottle of pesticide and end his life, and some passerby will see the body and come tell the widow. Case after case. 95% farmer suicides in India are like this. Pesticide deaths on the day of the land grab in the field, showing to me very clearly that farmer never wanted to lose the land. The parting with the earth, which is still a mother in most farmers' minds in India, that trauma is unbearable. So we have started to do what we do in Navdanya. We've created seed banks, we're helping farmers go organic, we're helping develop fibers of freedom. And when I was in that area on 2nd of October to launch the Seed Freedom Fortnight, one farmer dragged me. I was getting late for my flight. He said, but you have to come and see my fields, because I took seeds from the community seed bank of old native varieties that are called primitive. It was giving him higher yield. He was not having to spray. He was doing organic. The costs of inputs had dropped in 1 year from 275,000 rupees to 9,000 rupees. That's a 3,000 rupees. Next year it will be zero. Next year it will be zero. So seed sovereignty and seed freedom, with farmers having seed in their own hands, means no suicide, no debt. Having good seed and good organic farming means protection of the environment and protection of people's health, but most importantly, it means more food. Navdanya has, I think, trained more than 750,000 farmers in seed saving and organic farming in India. And we've done studies over the last 5 years, assessing biodiversity rather than yield, because a yield measures a monoculture production of a commodity that goes into biofuel or something else. It's not a food indicator. And a monoculture can drop your food production while increasing the monoculture. A typical farm, 9 units output. If it's replaced with a monoculture maize, it will have 5 units of maize. In the biodiverse farm, it's 4 units of maize, so it looks like you got 1 ton more. But in reality, you lost 4 tons of food. Exactly the image for Argentina that was in the figures of John Fagan's presentation. Potatoes gone, wheat gone, vegetables gone, everything we need gone. We are, through GMOs, dismantling our food and nutritional security. We've produced a report recently called Health Per Acre, in which very laboriously we took the output of biodiverse systems and then converted it to nutrition data. Across the board, much higher nutrition in biodiverse small ecological farms. And in certain areas where they're screaming and shouting about nutrition, beta carotene will give it to you with an indigenous soya and millets. And of course the vegetables, the spinach, will give it to you with the sahajan, the moringa. 7,000% more vitamin A available in biodiversity than the golden rice about which the proponents of GMO have gone hysterical. Owen Paterson, the UK food minister, just said again on BBC, this is all he says, that those who are criticizing GMOs and golden rice, which is the GMO product for reducing blindness in children through vitamin A increase, golden rice was to be introduced into India. We rejected it. They took it to Philippines. The peasants have uprooted it. And yet there's this hysteria, everyone must have it. But we have 7,000% more vitamin A available in alternatives at zero cost. They say this is for philanthropy. Syngenta owns golden rice patents, 80 patents, 80. So if it's about philanthropy, why don't you just withdraw those patents? Then we will say, yeah. But if it's about profits, we can know that in the first 2-3 years, you'll give it for free to a few farmers. Then you will use aid, like the G8 nutrition conditionalities. You will use aid to say only golden rice will be bought through aid programs. Only golden rice will be fed to children in school meals. You'll have a market of trillions of dollars. At that point, you will apply your patents and say, now governments, give us the royalty. Exactly what was done with the AIDS drugs. Remember there was the big fight, again related to India, 200 rupees for AIDS treatment, $200 versus $2,500 on the patented. It's not that the companies gave up the patent. They told the United Nations, you pay us the gap between the $2,500 and $200. So we still make our profits, and the United Nations subsidizes them. That's how they would work. Now that the GM of BT and Roundup resistant has so totally failed in terms of controlling pests and weeds, they've created super pests and super weeds. Everyone is having to recognize it's a failure. So they're now going into what they call biofortification. Golden rice is what I've called the Trojan horse. This year in May, we had to start a campaign on GMO banana in India. You don't get bananas from India, but India is the biggest producer and consumer of banana, with the highest diversity existing today, more than 300 varieties. You go to Kerala, one little tea shop will have 20 kinds of bananas. You go to Karnataka, you go to Tamil Nadu, especially the south. They want to enrich bananas with iron. Not a very smart idea, because bananas are brilliant, but they aren't the most important crop for iron. Only 0.44 milligrams. Compared to our diet, turmeric 67, tamarind 17, poppy seeds 15, mango powder 45. We are again talking about a 3,000% richer set of alternatives. If women could continue to grow and use this diversity in our food, if we had kitchen gardens everywhere, we have two clear models today. Seeds in the hand of Monsanto and Syngenta, production and trade in the hands of the Cargills and the Conagras, processing in the hands of the Nestles and the Pepsis, and retailing in the hands of a Walmart. Or seeds in the hands of women and peasants and children worldwide, because we want every school to have a garden, which is also a seed sanctuary, which is also a seed freedom zone from where we tell the Monsantos, this zone you cannot invade. This is patent-free, GMO-free, chemical-free. And with love, we will nurture the earth. And with love, we will protect the seed. Those gardens everywhere, community gardens, women's gardens, they are exploding. Exploding. 2 years ago, I just told them, the government of Rome, I said, this crisis can only be dealt with, the economic crisis, only dealt with if young people who are unemployed start to garden and grow food. They're doing that. Hundreds of gardens. And Rome is now writing a law to legalize the occupation by young unemployed people of the public lands. saying we have to address three problems. The ecological catastrophe, of which industrial agriculture is at the heart of biodiversity erosion, soil destruction, water destruction, and climate change. 40%. I wrote a book called Soil Not Oil. 40% of all greenhouse gases come from an industrialized model of agriculture and a globalized model of trade. The problem of health, 1 billion people hungry, but 2 billion suffering from diseases related to food. Totally avoidable if we begin with healthy seed, grow healthy food, and ensure that we eat healthy. Those are the rights which are being threatened by a GMO culture. A GMO is not a thing. A GMO is a system of power. It's a system of distorted, untruthful knowledge and propaganda replacing science, which is why our friends like Arpad Putzai, like Seralini, like Ignatius Chapella are hounded. If I hadn't left a scientific job in '82 to start an independent foundation, and if I was still in the Indian Institute of Science in India, I would have been an Arpad Putzai. But I left to work for movements and to work for society. In 2010, Monsanto tried to introduce a BT eggplant. We call it the BT brinjal. We have 4,500 varieties of brinjal. It's India's a home of brinjal. We immediately started a movement like this. Every child in every school had a postcard sending to the health minister. I don't want to eat this stuff, ban it. And the health minister actually banned it. He said, I won't let this come in. Of course, they don't give up. They never give up. That's why we can't afford to give up. We won't give up either, and we last longer. So we continue the movement. We compelled the Environment Ministry to hold public hearings, say, don't just listen to the lobbyists who can come to Delhi. Listen to the people by going to the remote parts of the country. Jairam Ramesh, our Environment Minister, held 7 public hearings. And realized when he went to the regions, the farmers don't want it, people don't want it, and the scientists say, but there is no pest like that in brinjal. And we have no deficiency in production. We have so much brinjal, we are feeding brinjal to our animals. So every argument turned out to be false. I think it was 10th of January. He passed a moratorium. One day before, Nina Fedorov, one of the big lobbyists of the biotech industry, who used to be the technology ambassador for the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, to push biotech around the world, I got a call from the embassy saying, will you meet? I said, of course I'll meet her. I'll meet any of them, anywhere, anytime. She was held back by a day by a snowstorm in Washington. And that's why when John says, who's in charge? Who's the conductor? When we realize it's this amazing universe and the earth, we realize we're working with 300 million species, billions of people, and we're having to deal with 2 corrupt giants who want to impose toxic food patterns, lies on us and destroy our democracies. India has never been sued for the moratorium on BT eggplant. If there was substance in this being a condition for joining WTO, we'd have had a case by now. So I think we need to draft a letter about how both the accession to the WTO and accession to the EU cannot be preconditioned on allowing GMOs with all the data from John's presentation, the data from all the regions in Europe that are GMO-free and the governments that are GMO-free, all the crops that are GMO-free, all the countries that have moratoria. Let's make it a letter as the state of GMOs so the truth be told. And the bullies and corrupt officials of the European Commission realize they are being watched. Because in 2003, the US government tried to sue Europe on GMOs. The minute I heard about it, we started a campaign Global Citizens Campaign on GMOs in WTO. And we collected signatures, and the letter was very simple. The letter was, we are watching you. It was about the case, and then they said, we are watching you. And 30 million signatures went to the WTO, and I handed these over in the Hong Kong ministerial. Said, we are watching you, and if you vote for Monsanto, you will be seen as a Monsanto institution. On intellectual property rights, you already are. But on biosafety, if you do this, you'll be seen as Monsanto. You'll have no credibility as a trade organization. You will be seen as an outfit of Monsanto. So for your sake to survive, you were nearly killed in Seattle through citizens' movement. We are watching. They did not dare rule against Europe on the bans and moratoria. They did not dare. European Commission tried to impose the removal of bans. And again, citizens moved and they could not impose it. So if every time they've had to withdraw when they threaten countries about free trade and these bans, they need to be reminded about every other period they lost with their bullying. Bullying is not the game in a democracy. Democracy is the game in a democracy. I want to end with some ideas about the future. I think what we do need to do for every country, we brought out a report 2 years ago, synthesizing worldwide what's going on, written by scientists and citizens in every part of the world. Argentinians wrote the Argentina chapter, Brazilians wrote the Brazilian chapter, the US citizens wrote the US chapter. And when we collected it all, there was failure, 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 failure everywhere. But for Monsanto, it wasn't a failure. Because every seed that fails, Monsanto sells twice. Every herbicide resistance, they sell a more toxic herbicide. They don't fail. Their profits don't fail. But for people, it's a failure. So we did this report and we're compelled to give it the title, The GMO Emperor Has No Clothes. You remember the story of the naked emperor? And everyone was clapping because they were too embarrassed to look stupid, because they were told, if you don't see the clothes, you're stupid. It's the same with the GMO issue. We're all being told, if you don't see the brilliance, then you're stupid. We've got to be that child that says, but the emperor has no clothes. Because the GMO emperor truly has no clothes. Now, what is needed now is two things in the next year. The first, we need to identify in each of our countries who is blocking our freedom and our democracy. Which is the corrupt politician, which is the corrupt bureaucrat, which is the scientist for sale, and which is the media person telling false stories. Once we have this for every country, we put it up next year on the internet. So their blackmailing capacity will go. They will be known to be the people who clap for the naked emperor. The second, we got to celebrate the fact that the main food security system is the biodiverse, the organic, the small. That's the future. The European law is trying to call it the niche market in seed. And we are saying, I told the European parliamentarians, create a slogan, we are not the niche, we are the future. Organic will not be a niche, we are the future. Not only will GMO not be a niche, it will be finished as the alternative grows. And for that, yesterday we launched a campaign for a whole year. Let's recognize the people in our areas who are the real food heroes who bring us real food. Because Monsanto gave itself a World Food Prize yesterday. I think the award will be today, actually. The ceremony is today. But they're on the board, or they're on the sponsorship of the World Food Prize, and they give it to themselves. So we said, let's honor the real food heroes that bring us real food. Who are the food heroes? The organic farmers, the seed savers, the mothers, those who cooked for us, the little cafe that still cares, the little small business that's trying to bring good food to people, the researcher who stands tall in integrity and independence. And I can see here in Serbia, that's a community that really deserves to be heroes. The politicians who defended democracy and integrity. We have a lot of work to do, but there's a lot to celebrate. Last year we brought out this massive seed freedom report. which is the stories of seed saving around the world. Because seed freedom is the freedom of the seed to evolve with its full evolutionary potential. The freedom of the farmer to be able to have their seed, save their seed. Freedom of the breeder to be able to breed good quality seeds. Freedom of the eater and the mother to be able to get safe food to their children. I'm going to leave these as a small gift with all of you for your campaign, and I would like to invite you to contribute to these because we're going to update them this year. And I've traveled to tell you, we are with you, and we'll be with you till you make change.
Hvala, draga Vandana, za sve reči koje su tako duboko dirnule srca svih nas.
I cannot understand the desperation of Serbia to join the European Union when it's collapsing. And to try and the World Trade Organization, when, as Pascal Lamy, the last Director General, said it is in intensive care since why aren't we looking at how weak these systems have become, how much in crisis they are, and it's far more important to build exactly in the way you all have described, the 500 women, the gardens, the 5 freedoms, that's what we work on. Seed freedom, food freedom, land freedom, water freedom, and forest freedom. We can defend these 5, the rest we can look after. And these 5 we'll have to defend both by protecting them and celebrating them, and I love the keepers of nature idea. All our children must be trained in being keepers of nature. And while we do that, I would suggest that while so far we've said GMO free, we now have to say GMO free, patent free, seed freedom and food freedom zones. So we start claiming the positive that we are shaping. And we've worked very hard on this law of the seed, which can be adopted at the local level, at the private individual level. It can be adopted by the local governments that have become GMO free. And it's basically shifting from this idea of uniformity and centralization and a non-sustainable system to the 3 qualities that came up all the time in the discussion today: diversity, quality, and resilience. Both resilience in terms of economic resilience to funny markets, as well as ecological resilience to climate change and disease. And we've got to work, you have to work, we do the work, got to constantly watch the bureaucrats, the parliament. And the point is, if they do, in spite of all the warnings and in spite of all the movements, end up creating a desperate change that is totally unjustified in today's world context, then we always have the path that Gandhi gave us. When I heard these companies first, I said, how do we deal with them? And I was inspired by Gandhi saying, as long as the superstition exists that unjust law must be obeyed, so long will slavery exist. It is our duty to not obey unjust law. So, a corrupt parliament or a corrupt bureaucracy or a corrupt state can pass a law, but we don't have to adopt it. We can only say yes and put our lives. And as we expand these zones, when we gave the figures of the 4,000 villages, 1,900 are empty. And then you've got a movement, let's go back to the villages. I think these are amazing new trends that must grow. Finally, you said, I don't know how I like you. I love you anyway because you're wonderful people. I have never seen such a large concentration of scientists, of doctors in this fight anywhere else. The privileged don't join. The peasants are there, the youth are there. Usually the doctors making money and the scientists are either silent or selling out. So congratulations, and you are such a strong force because of this. And you know, when I suggested that we've got to start identifying which scientist is speaking on behalf of this failed technology, which politician is promoting bad laws against sovereignty and freedom, which media person is constantly writing nonsense in spite of all the evidence just because they have the space. While we do all that, I think we do need to recognize our own strengths too. Because I think there's more knowledge and science on the side of those who say no to GMOs. We have been talking about creating, I mean, there's already a European network of independent scientists for social and ecological responsibility. And I think every country should evolve its own network. Not depend on the old academies, but create new networks which are interdisciplinary, where the doctors and the nutritionists, and the agronomists and the biodiversity experts, and the agriculturists, all of them come together in a network about defining and defending this preferred future. But the final reason I think I love you all is if you're in the jungle, we are in the jungle. And the jungle is the best place to be. Because